And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Tony Williams, his life and times and best hits. Tony Williams started out with Miles Davis, where he made a name for himself as a very innovative drummer. He started out playing the drums at age 11. By 15, he was touring in Boston. In 1960, he started touring alongside Sam Rivers and Jackie McLean. He was then recruited to Miles Davis Quintet, where his rhythmic innovations made him one of the leading jazz drummers of his time. He started out solo in the late 60s and debuted on Blue Note Records in the album Lifetime, which went on to become a jazz classic. Other great albums he produced included Angel Street, Native Heart, Foreign Intrigue and Spring. He also formed an iconic fusion group alongside John McLaughlin and Larry Young that was all about blending jazz and rock. He also toured for a while alongside Herbie Hancock's band VSOP. So that was some insight into the life and times and best hits of Tony Williams. More details coming up. Also coming up, some trending festival and album news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Tony Williams, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. So Tony Williams was born in Chicago, grew up in Boston. He started out at age 13 playing the drums. At the age of 17, he became the youngest member of Miles Davis' band, famously known as Miles Davis' Second Great Quintet. He recorded his very first album, Lifetime, alongside Davis' band. Even though he was still an up-and-coming jazz drummer, Williams was a vital element of Davis' music. His style was vastly instrumental in shaping the sound of Miles Davis' music through his innovativeness, his navigation of technicalities like polyrhythms, tempos, and time signatures. He was also great at improvisation. In 1969, he set out on his own and formed his band Lifetime. Joining him on the trio were John McLaughlin on guitar and Larry Young on organ. The band was heavily based on fusion. Their styles combined jazz, rock, and R&B. Their very first album, Emergency, was initially a failure but went on to become a classic in later years. Several albums later, the band Lifetime disbanded. In 1975, Tony Williams put together a second group featuring himself on drums, Tony Newton on bass, Alan Pascoe on piano, and Alan Holdsworth on guitar. This group was called the New Tony Williams Lifetime. They recorded two hit albums for Columbia Records, Believe It and $1 Million Legs. In 1976, Williams reunited with his old Miles Davis bandmates for a special performance. The record was later released under the title VSOP, which stood for a very special one-time performance, and became very popular in the acoustic jazz genre. The group, featuring bassist Ron Carter and tenor saxophonist Wayne Shorter and so forth, went on to tour for several years to come. Many of their albums were released under the name the VSOP Quintet. In 1985, Williams recorded another great album called Foreign Intrigue. On this album, it was himself on drums, pianist Marlboro Miller, and trumpeter Wallace Rooney. Later, he formed a trio featuring the same players. His final album release was called Arcana, a collaboration with guitarist Bill Frisell. Tony Williams died in 1997, leaving behind a legacy as a leading jazz drummer. So that was some insight into the biography of Tony Williams, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Tony Williams, his life and times and best hits. Now let's have some trending album news. There's a new album offer released by husband and wife duo Jeff and Jean at Fogo. The album is called Retrospective and features influences of jazz, pop and rock. The songs are covers of beautiful classics from the turn of the 21st century, portraying jazz themes. Some of the songs include Wonderful World, Stepping Out, Holding Back the Tears, The Sound of Silence and more. Henry Beals on acoustic bass. He's composed for Netflix in his time. Joseph Carpenter is a freelance jazz drummer. He's been playing since the 90s, a wide range of music from jazz to rock. Jeanette Fergus on vocals. She's been a mainstay in the jazz and opera scene for over 40 years. For more information, please visit thefergus.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Tony Williams' best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Tony Williams, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first album is called Lifetime, released in 1964. This was Tony's debut album and sees him alongside a great lineup, names like Sam Rivers, Bobby Hutcherson and others. One highlight of the album is that Williams wrote all 4 compositions on the album, and each piece sees a different combination of musicians performing it. The music is very innovative and unpredictable and has a mesmerizing performance from beginning to end. Wilderness was released in 1996. This album sees Tony paired alongside an all-star quintet. The music plays out as string and orchestra music. Williams wrote all the songs himself. The moods of the songs range from fiery to melancholy. Some of the highlights: a string song called Wilderness Rising, a quiet lyrical song called The Night You Were Born, and a rocking song, China Moon. Angel Street was released in 1988. This was a great album from Tony's hard bop days of the 90s. The highlight of the album is the solos by the bandmates, trumpeter Wallace Rooney, Billy Pierce on saxophone and pianist Marlboro Miller. The music is driven by some very powerful drumming by Tony. Williams wrote most of the songs himself, many of which are taken from his days with Miles Davis. A very passion-filled compilation of music. So that was a quick insight into what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, it's Tony Williams, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called Lifetime, released in 1964. So Tony Williams was one of the leading pioneers of the avant-garde jazz movement of the 60s. After impressing Miles Davis with his drumming skills at the age of just 17, he was taken into the Miles Davis second grade quintet. During his stint with Davis, he proved himself as a top-notch drummer who changed the face of Miles Davis' own music and also branched out into other genres like jazz fusion. As he continued to reshape the jazz drumming landscape with his music, he was offered a chance to land his own album with Blue Note Records. So he debuted on the album with his album Lifetime in 1964. The album featured a star-studded lineup, names like Bobby Hutcherson, Sam Rivers, Ron Carter and others. The lineup was a dream team from the post-pop genre and all the compositions were penned by Williams himself. The album is a very adventurous album. The music in the album is very intense and moving, very emotional and vibrant, bringing out the best of every composition. The album opens up with a long two-part suite called Two Pieces of One. The song features bass and saxophone duets. The next song, Tomorrow Afternoon, features some great imaginative improvisation. One of the notable features of this song is the beautiful synchronization between Sam Rivers and Gary Peacock. Memory is a percussion-oriented track. William plays several percussion instruments on this song, including traditional instruments like a tripani, wood blocks, maracas, and a triangle. The final composition sees Hancock and Ron Carter on piano and bass duets. A whimsical song called Bob's Song to the Wizard. It's also a great composition from Williams. So this album is a very fresh, groundbreaking album that paved the way for Williams' journey as a drummer. The next song is called Wilderness, released in 1996. This one's a unique album. The theme of the album is wilderness. We see Tony Williams joined by a top-notch orchestra featuring Pat Metheny, Stanley Clarke and others, as they thresh out the meaning of wilderness in various forms through the tracks. The liner notes also help along with their definitions of the meanings of wilderness. Each of the songs or musical poems are also titled to that effect. Each song is about a different meaning of that word. Also, Williams contrasts the natural sound of the orchestra with a backdrop of electric songs, electric keyboard, bass and so forth to bring out the theme of the album. So the album takes a listener on a journey of wilderness, different moods associated with that theme playing out from track to track. The full orchestra provides a scenic glimpse of an outdoorsy terrain with its natural sounds. There's a fusion quintet that supplies sounds of a city street with its brash dynamic playing. There's also another highlight. Many of the pieces incorporate thoughtful improvisation that's about the wilderness inside the human mind. Some of the highlights of the album: The Night You Were Born featuring Michael Brecker taking us through some deeply sonorous saxophone playing. Hancock's on keyboard and Metheny's on guitar and they give off that late night clubbing vibe. Hancock and Metheny also shine on the song Gambia. Hancock shows off his unique mix of energetic and blues-based piano styles while Metheny adds flourishes of beautiful guitar solos. The album comes to an end with some great solos and group interplay. Angel Street was released in 1988. This was another great hard bop session by Tony Williams from the late 80s. There's some great solos from trumpeter Wallace Rooney, Billy Pierce on tenor and soprano saxophone and pianist Marlboro Miller. All the bandmates stretch out beautifully on an exciting series of songs. Also, Tony Williams' drumming is very high-powered and in a concert setting almost drowned out the background instrumentals. There's also 9 original compositions penned by Tony Williams taken from his days alongside Miles Davis. The music, unlike his other albums, is traditional jazz and the highlight here is the passion, the intensity of the playing. So that was some insight into some of Tony Williams' best albums of all time, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, Tony Williams, his life and times and best hits. Now it's time for some trending album news. Indian jazz legend Anupam Shobaka is out with a new release that celebrates the fusion of Western and Eastern music. Anupam Shobaka grew up in India where he fell in love with the works of jazz legends like Steve Vai, Alan Holdsworth and others. He started out playing the sarod, a type of Eastern guitar, and has toured the world in his time. He's also had a passion to bridge Western musical influences with Eastern musical influences. On this album, Liquid Spirit, he does that, bridging the gap between the two musical genres. So, Liquid Reality is Anupam's debut in his new approach. Some of the highlights from the album: Anjanaya, a beautiful piece featuring South Indian rhythms played by composer Swaminathan Selva-Ganesh and drums by Sakosh Takeshi, a leading jazz percussionist. Ladders to the Sky is a Brazilian-tinged composition of his own and a tribute to Pat Metheny's group First Circle. The track combines percussion by Gambi Ortiz and vocals by Ona Kay. A song called Formless that fuses various Western and Eastern musical ideas together. This piece is a bright, energetic piece featuring Swaminathan Selva-Ganesh on drums. So this album is a tour de force in bridging the gap between Western guitar styles and Indian classical music. To purchase the album, please visit www.shobaka.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Tony Williams' best albums of all time. Stay tuned.